So let's get started with such an excellent panel where we have a representation of the startup world, of traditionalists and also experts around MACH. So I'm very, very happy and can actually not wish for a better kind of panel in such an environment. Let's start with the first question, maybe with you, Max. When we are thinking about composable commerce and MACH, what does it mean for a fashion startup, for Otrium?
For us, it means that we're able to work with several components across our stack and experiment with these elements more easily. In fashion e-commerce, there's a lot of innovation happening on several parts of that value chain, whether it's across returns, whether it's across fit, and using our more distributed setup, we can use the latest technology, plug them in to our stack quickly, test them whether they work, take them out if they don't. Yeah.
Very cool. And we see a great fashion setup that it works certainly for you.
Yes.
How does it work actually in food, and especially in a context of a more traditional environment?
Yeah. How does it work? Where does it work? Where are we able to get it to work? That's the major question. For us, it's more about being able to fail fast. And with fail fast, I mean failing cheap and learning fast, right? So if you have a monolith, like a giant system that supposedly does it all, and you make some major changes to it, it takes a long time to implement, and then it takes an even longer time to actually go live, and usually then it's not right. And so you're very slow in your changes, you're very hesitant. It's always betting the shop when you make a change, and where we want to go is just giving the reins of the business back to the individual business. Giving them the option to just experiment, do the A/B testing, and just get it out there, get the data, get the proof, and then iterate. Because that business has been pretty much stagnant. I hope this is not playing in. I didn't say stagnant. You're doing a great job, but it's not innovative as much as the rest of the market. We are lagging behind in actually adopting our stores to what the market wants.
So if you're talking about fail fast, I assume that you did fail slow before. What does it mean? How slow have you been before? How fast can you be now?
The thing you want to avoid is a big bang, right? So a big bang is a project that needs a lot of management in simultaneously going live. So everything has to be up and running. The data has to be aligned everywhere. All the new versions have to go live at one point, and then the stores open, everything has to run at once. So we found out that by nature, being a supermarket, we're not the best at that. And we are very good at what we do. And being a supermarket, IT is not our core strength, because it needs discipline, and a cooperative supermarket is more like a big band of pirates. Right? So they know where the money is, they know how to sell stuff, know how to get the shops full, but really being disciplined in IT things is difficult. So that's one angle. So you shouldn't do things that you're not very good at. The other one is more like, you really don't get the alignment between all the other parties in a big directorate. So we have 8 directors, and they all guard their part of the ship, and getting them to agree in something that changes, that's like herding cats, you know? So you have to give them the autonomy of changing their thing without disrupting everybody else. Only then you get the wheel of change actually going.
Yeah. Sonja, you have been involved in many of those kind of projects, have been part of it, have seen it from outside, lots of success cases, also cases that needed to become over time a success. Maybe if we go to the beginning of such a story, what are the main decision drivers when you're not yet on the MACH architecture that actually decision makers need to take into account to go with a MACH architecture or with a MACH approach?
Yeah. That is something that has changed a lot in the last 3 years, right? So maybe first to differentiate composability and MACH a little, because that makes a difference for the decision. So composable, you're all tech folks, just means modular bits instead of one big blob, need to be able to plug it together, orchestrate it, fail fast, and so on. MACH within composability is a super opinionated version of what does amazing composability look like. And that's where you get the cloud nativeness and so on in. So that is a decision in itself. Do I want to go composable or do I want to go MACH? What we've seen is that in the past 3 years, creating amazing customer experiences, innovating quickly, and not spending too much money failing while doing so has been the biggest driver. The need to get autonomy on the business side of the house so that they can function and tech doesn't have to say no anymore and be the bad guy all the time. And that has transformed very much the ways of working in the organizations. In the past year, I have seen more conversation around cost. Conversations around how can we make sure we can quickly offboard vendors too, right? Which is not easy when you have an SAP implementation, right? So not so much looking at innovation at all cost, but really looking at how can I set up my business plan and my business outcomes so that I invest and not just spend, yeah.
And this is probably also closely linked to this debate that is happening in many boardrooms, but also in tech, for tech decision makers. Do you go with a best of breed approach, or do you go for a best integrated approach? And MACH seems to be somewhere in between, or more a best of breed, where you can really pick kind of the composable aspects of a commerce solution. There is a lot of history about, for instance, microservices that goes back to the 80s and 90s and just became popularized more over the last 10, 15 years. What was really the trigger that made MACH so much more powerful over the last kind of 10 years compared to the time before? Because the concepts existed already for a much longer time.
Yeah, it did. So when we thought about founding the MACH Alliance, that was 2019. Mm-hmm. And I remember clearly talking to Forrester Research, and they said 83%, it's tattooed on my brain, 83% of CEOs of large enterprises wake up every morning and think digital is a nice thing to have. And then COVID happened, right? Yeah. So if you ask me what made MACH in particular so successful, I think the urgency that COVID brought to commerce to change the way things are working was a big driver. And as you had the first pioneers proving, wait a second, we can iterate much faster, we can create much more revenue, and actually at lower cost, well, then everybody started to listen, right? And that's why it has gotten so absurdly much traction in a short amount of time.
So Rick, can you maybe give us a little bit a look behind the scenes? So you are now in the transition phase to actually move to a MACH solution. So I guess this decision was made some months, some years back. What was the driver? Who was actually in the driver's seats here? How did you actually go through this transition phase?
Well, to be honest, we haven't gone through it yet. So if you're a simple company, this is still a multi-year problem. And if you're a very complex problem, this very complex company, this might be a decade problem, right? So we actually looked at the central strategy. We thought, how can we, as you said, not be the bad guy? Mm-hmm. So when business says, hey, I've got this new idea, I want this implemented tomorrow. Why do we always have to say no? And so the main reasons that we say no is that we call it dependency hell, right? So what happens, I'll give you one small example that's very easy. I think in many companies this happens. It's what we call the finance hijack. Right, so you've got this big category tree. You've got 25,000 products in a hierarchy, and so they're all categorized. At one time, finance thinks, hey, that is very easy. Just follow the money. There's categories, and then we just measure how much revenue it is per category. Now, that's very nice, and then the accountants come in, and some systems are automated on that, and that thing becomes a system. And then the category manager says, okay, that one category, I now want to change it. And then the accountant says, oh, you're never going to change this. I won't be able to survive my audit when you change my tree. And they say, yeah, but who is now the category manager? You or me? And they said, no, it's finance, because finance is always right. See, from that moment on, you have just lost the autonomy about your own structure of your categories, right? So that's what we call dependency hell. So before we had a constraint on resources, so you always want to reuse everything. Central database architecture, central this, central that, and you want to use as little of IT as possible because it was scarce. Now we live in an era of abundance, but we still got those dependencies. And that's a problem that we now battle. So what we realize is that if we want to give the reins back to the business, we have to find out how do we make the demarcations of the business. So what is a business function? And if you have a directorate, how can we analyze that directorate? How much business functions does it comprise of? So commerce has like 6 functions. Fine. Let's make sure that every time we change something in IT, we make it an autonomous unit specifically for that. And then we basically, we bottom up change the organization structure. So if you want to look this up on the internet, that's where all the answers are, you can find this under a reverse Conway maneuver. If you want to know what that is, I'll answer that later, but it will become very technical later.
Let's see if we come back to this, but a very interesting perspective we can get maybe from Max, from Otrium, who actually started more with a MACH architecture from day one. Not a decade kind of a journey, but actually the entire venture is a little bit less than 10 years old. But a very interesting perspective, and what will be probably interesting for all of us to understand as we went through this kind of COVID phase, a huge spike in demand, and now it somehow normalizes. Can you give us a glimpse or a look behind the scenes? How has maybe a MACH and let's say the way how composable commerce works in Otrium helped you to go through this kind of different phases?
Yeah, just hearing all these stories from the pre-MACH phase makes me so happy. I've never had to experience that. I think you mentioned that earlier, it also sets you in motion to control your costs much more flexibly, and that is exactly the transition that we have gone through in the entire e-commerce market, I think, from growth at all costs to profitability first, and our structure really allowed us to play with that. We were able to test a lot of things because funding was endless and growth was endless during COVID, and now we are able to choose like what features are really worth it, what features are not worth it at all, what features we'd rather not pay a SaaS fee anymore and we build ourselves, but we can really surgically take these out because they're all independent of each other, and our structure is built that way, so it doesn't break.
It doesn't break.
So it's super nice. Yeah.
So what I see in Picnic, but also in many startups, is if you have a kind of if you start from scratch, then MACH or composable commerce is a very natural way to get started.
Yeah.
If you have a kind of a history that is a bit longer than a MACH actually exists, then usually you need to ask yourself the question, do you actually, at which point in time do you move towards a kind of a MACH architecture? I would be interested, maybe maybe one of you both can answer, what are actually the risks of moving towards a MACH architecture, or how do you actually make a kind of cost benefit or kind of a risk benefit type of analysis of moving towards MACH versus maybe not yet?
Yeah, and first of all, I think what you said is really important to realize. You can't move to MACH, right? You're moving to MACH over a really long period of time, and there is no pure MACH architecture anywhere in the world. You always have hybrid reality, right? So how do you start? You have to start small, right? Because if you have a big boat and you shift it really quickly, half of the folks are going to fall out, and you don't want to do that. So find the smallest possible first use cases, first pieces of technology that you can unplug and prove internally that it works. Because it is not about technology. Like MACH makes sure you don't have technology as the bottleneck anymore, but to make MACH work, you got to get the organization on board to actually work with it as well. So start small. Big change is scary. Small change is okay.
So one of the interesting changes, maybe Rick, you can give us a little bit of kind of some insight on how you made it, is if you start to move one piece, then actually a lot of other things need to immediately change at the same time. Yeah. So there is a lot of connectivity, especially if you start from a monolithic environment. How have you handled it? It's
painful. Yeah, and also you want to start small, but you also want to see some gains, and you want to celebrate some successes and make it insightful that we are on the right track. So people, hey, you can trust this is going the right way. So the first iterations in going from like a big monolithic spaghetti landscape, you probably won't be able to do that. That's a sad truth. So you will have to go through a few phases that you free up some business elements, but it's not clear that they are returning something yet. And so a very short example, price management is something that we didn't have before 2010. Right? The supermarket wars, and suddenly we had price managers. And then they started doing their own job, and then they became Excel gurus. And so 95% of their time they were crunching Excel until that was impossible to do. So what I did is just free up their time by automating their Excels. that does not give the business anything yet. It will still take a year for them to mature and say, okay, now we are not just going to look at those prices from a competition advantage, but also from a margin advantage, and also from a if you have too much stock, the price should like go down. That is a third axis they haven't incorporated yet, but they don't know the business rules for that yet. So they still need a few years to come up with that. And so once you free the business to give them time back to do their business, it doesn't return value yet. It takes time for the business to actually return something. So the IT guys who set them free are never going to be on the stage saying, oh, those were our heroes. They will just die in the shadows, poor and alone.
Oh God.
That's the sad truth.
May I offer a different perspective? So I think there's always the first nut you have to crack.
Yeah.
And when we say MACH, we think digital experiences, right? We're not thinking OMS and warehouse and all of that. You always first have to decouple your front end.
Yeah.
Because only when you can decouple your front end can you start small, right? And then you can say, oh, we only want to test this new search and merge thing, or this new way of getting content in, or campaign, or whatever it is, right? So that is always the first step. And if you have multiple brands, start with the smallest one. If you have multiple countries, start with the one where people are most cooperative, right? So then you can kind of celebrate in a fenced playground. Yeah.
So the thing is that this month for us is very important, right? Because we are going to go live with our MACH e-commerce platform, which just so happens to be having an engine in the backend is powered by commercetools. So what we chose to do is have a triangle of that solution. So we knew that we could never create a functional design that was better than what the market could offer from the back part of e-commerce. Right, because the market now has a lot of experience, and if we can do a better job than that, we should be smarter than the whole of the market. Usually we are not, right? But the front end keeps on changing almost every day. So every sprint we need to have a slightly different service, slightly a different paint on it. And so we need to have a flexible front end, but a very stable back end. And then there's the content management part in between. So if you open the website and you want to order something by iPhone, you get optimized imagery for an iPhone. And it needs to be very, very rapid, because these days people don't have patience, right? So that is a triangle that we thought about. But before you can do that, the business needs to be able to say, okay, how should those prices work on that platform? So even before you can actually go to the MACH thing, you need to have business that's free to come up with new business rules that you implement in that MACH architecture.
So what I hear is actually, while we obviously all want to move to a microservice architecture and have all kind of APIs between the services, actually already an important first step is to go from one big monolith to actually 2 services. Not maybe 20, but just 2, and have an API in between. And you called it very nicely, just a decouple front end from back end, and that is already a major step. One thing what I also heard is that you need to take your organization along, and you need to prepare your organization. Maybe before we go to the question on how you have done this, a question to Max. Is actually Otrium, is your organization aware that you're running a kind of a MACH architecture? How do you see this internally? Is this something? Is this so normal on your side that everybody takes it for granted, or?
I certainly do. I don't know if that's true for the engineering team as well. Some of us are sitting there. I think it's so natural to us that certainly no one outside of tech is aware that we're doing this, and that is different than sort of market standard best practice. Probably also because the average age is around 30 in the company, so I don't think there was a lot of monolithic experience. That requires management on its own. Because there's a lot of pros with this architecture style, but there's also cons that you need to work.
And that is actually what you call sometimes the sweet spot of an architecture. If it comes so natural that nobody really realizes that you are doing it, because it is so beneficial, that this is the most logical way to do it. So question is now, how did you prepare your organization? How did you make everybody ready for it?
Did we make everybody ready? No, we did not. No, we couldn't. we just started, and we got a few people. But we knew up front in 2019 that this was going to be a very, very long journey. So the preparation phase, those poor IT guys that were dying in the shadows alone and poor, some of them actually, when I think of that, I think more than 20, they did very important preparational projects. That without it we cannot go to the MACH architecture. They've already left. So not everybody is going to see the end of this journey. It's taking that long. But where we can, we just evangelize continuous. And at one point, our e-commerce solution, it was postponed like a year, because we had to do our data preparation first. That year we lost momentum a lot. So a few of the board members actually start questioning things. Will it actually happen? They've got no affinity with IT. So they just said, hey, you said it was going to be fast. Fast was last year. We started waiting here. It's a hard discussion. So if we look back at it, we should have had more small victories just to keep the momentum going. So that's one of the lessons that we learned. We didn't do enough small projects. We had a few very big ones. And some small things of it went live, but there wasn't enough to carry the flag of the MACH architecture continuously. So we now have to again prepare people. There's new board members coming in. You again have to evangelize and hold up the narrative.
Sonja, I think this obviously very much resonates, I guess, with the project that you have seen. Besides, let's say, the incremental releasing and transition towards such an architectural pattern. One other kind of benefit or one other kind of direction could be to front load as much as possible the biggest gains. Can you share a little bit of what would be from your perspective the biggest gains that the MACH architecture provides, and how could we actually front load this? So there's composability, there's APIs, there's all kind of other things. Is there something where you say, well, that is something what you should maybe as a community, we should do first, and then afterwards maybe focus on the other aspects?
Is it okay if I don't give you a technical answer?
You decide how you want to answer.
The best way if you want to bring an organization onto that new way of working is to front load it with pain. So what I mean by that is you have to make people aware of what an amazing greenfield opportunity in life could look like, and why it might not be ideal for your business survival, to your point, to continue doing what you've been doing for the last 10, 20, 30, 100 years, right? Because you can't manage MACH. You got to inspire people to want to change. And that goes for the architects as much as for the CEO. So if you want to front load anything, have that conversation first. What is the art of the possible? And I typically see companies actually use 3-4 concrete use cases to do that. What if we had done BOPIS faster? What if we had done this faster? How much more revenue could we have made? And that's a roadshow. That's where the CIO, CTO, whatever, actually goes out and talks to all the teams in person to do that, which is not something IT naturally does. That's how you front load it. And then you decide which of those tools, but that depends on where your pains are. There's no generic answer what tech you should start with.
Something what I hear sometimes, and that is about MACH, but also sometimes about the application of machine learning and other things in an organization that is very advanced, is that the more traditional companies feel that the gap is so big that they can't bridge it at all and just give up at some point. Yeah. Do you have, which is obviously very sad and nobody should do, right, but do you have some kind of hints for how you can keep everybody encouraged to still take the first steps?
Well, it's not really an option, right? Because the gap is big and it's only going to get bigger. So let's realize that first. It's not going to happen that cloud goes away, that customers all of a sudden don't change their expectations and so on. So back to the pain. If you want to find one place you have to do anyway, I got to go back to the front end. As soon as you have your front end piece decoupled from your back end, you can iterate. You can even just decide to just do the homepage or your next Christmas campaign page or whatever. Start there. And there's tools that can, pull the content and the products from SAP one day and from commercetools the next, right? That's all out there. So just free the front end and then you can go.
Otrium is a very exciting startup in the Amsterdam or the let's say Netherlands and beyond that space that is going through a very dynamic phase. Can you give us a little bit of kind of an outlook what will come next for you guys and how will MACH maybe help there?
What is next for us is not just Europe anymore. We're expanding now to the United States as well. We've been active there for 1.5 years. My co-founder moved to New York to spearhead our expansion. And I think also there are a very natural way of working with a Mac setup helps us. When we went to the US, we made, of course, the naive mistake to think that it's a country, but it is much more like the European Union, a continent. So we quickly found out that tax is a huge issue, and that every state has like completely different tax rules. But of course, the US is also very technical, advanced, so they have really good tools to help you with that. But for us, it was a week work to implement a fully automated tax system into both our backend and our front end to display for people ordering from different states their specific sales tax, and to get it also in our backend rightly registered, and we could just run on that application. Probably I'm exaggerating with a week.
Yeah,
That's how it felt for me.
Dramatic pause. A week?
Amazing.
Yeah. So
and you consider a week long?
Yeah. so our structure really helped us to make those moves in the right way and to solve really complex issues. Actually, for us, pretty lightweight way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sonja, can you give maybe a little bit of kind of an outlook? How will MACH or in general this ecosystem look like in a couple of years' time?
Oh gosh.
What is there something on the horizon, something that you feel is maybe not yet has not materialized in a way as maybe it should have?
I hate that this is being recorded and put on YouTube, but I just saw it's going red, so I hope it's out now. Yeah, so I think there's a few things that are happening already. So, do you know when we're talking about the last 3 years, everything got smaller, all those microservices were actually really small. We're seeing now that the modules are getting larger. We've maybe over-modularized a few things with companies having 70 to 300 microservices just serving their digital experience. So we see consolidation both from the functionality and feature sets, but also in the vendor landscape. We're seeing the legacy tech, of course, working really hard to adopt those new principles as well. So, I think in 5 years, we wouldn't have this conversation. Legacy would have caught up. All the best of breed vendors are starting to come together, and some next wave will happen. For the MACH Alliance, what is changing now is that we're out of the innovator space and into what we call early majority customers, so normal people, basically. So the mandate there goes away from telling people that it's great to focusing on how do you actually do it successfully, right? So there's going to be an education program launched, more contact with digital leaders, brand ambassadors that you can just call and ask. The how is going to be more important.
Maybe an open question to all of you to wrap up this panel. So there's a lot of kind of very interesting kind of things going on in tech beside MACH. So there's machine learning, deep learning, generative AI, there's IoT, many things. Has any of you, or what is the connection and to which extent helps a MACH architecture to also unlock the potential of very different kind of fields, so for instance around IoT, around Gen AI, etc., which are obviously all very relevant and important for commerce, but where's the link?
Yeah, it's I would say very fiercely, without the MACH architecture you will not be able to adopt it at scale, because it will be a satellite on something unimportant. And so freeing up the front end, that is of course what you need to do. But it's only possible if you have demarcated segments in your backend that can now autonomously change. Until you have done that, just slapping on a new front end doesn't matter, because the backend is still meshed up. Right? So that's the first thing you need to do. And if you want to do anything meaningful with complex things like AI, you have to give it to the business and let them play around with it. But then play around for real, get the data in there. And so you make an idea, you think, hey, could this help us? You try it, you've got an A/B test, you put the AI in the middle, and you start iterating. So as long as those things are still stuck in the back end, the damage doing to other services is too high. So you never get a green light to actually ever experiment. And so you need this market architecture to be autonomous, to experiment, to get the data, to get a business case, to get approval, and then you get momentum.
Yeah, I fully agree, because where our structure is so API based, it allows our developers to have a lot of fun and to test things quickly. So when the Gen AI hype was at its highest, we were hacking together automated descriptions for products, automated product models and that was all possible and being able to put in production quickly because we were that structure came so natural to us. And so these new innovations, you can integrate them much faster into your business if you are on such a structure.
And it's exactly also the same what we have seen at Picnic, where actually such an architecture gives you two things. On the one hand, you can run those experiments, so that's one, but even more important, you can run them very fast. So that allows you also to run experiments that are a little bit more ambitious, and you can quickly switch on and switch off things, and you can very, very, very fast learn. And essentially the most important thing what you learn in this kind of building a startup world is that it's not so much the type of experiments you run, but the speed of experiments. So if you run now 5 or 10 experiments per week instead of only 1 per month, then you can iterate easily 10 times, 100 times faster than anybody else in the industry.
Completely.
Yes. That was a very, very insightful panel, and I have to say there was so much wisdom nuggets in it, so I hope that everybody, all of you, could take also something out of it. Thank you so much for the discussion here. So we are now moving to the breakout sessions, and we'll again come back here afterwards. Thank you. Let's get started again. So, such a lively discussion. It's really great to see how everybody is engaged after the panel that we had beforehand. I heard also lots of interesting things. I'm really interested now. What have you guys actually heard from the discussions? What was really standing out for you? Maybe Sonja, can I start with you?
Sure. So 2 things. The first one is the idea of when am I MACH and when am I not, right? And we talked about this earlier. Don't have as an ambition to be fully composable, because that isn't reality. There's parts of your infrastructure, of your tech stack that might be okay to be monolithic or even old, right? So where it differentiates you, your brand, that's where you might want to think at. And then I heard 3 people say, but my legacy license still runs for 3 years. What do I do? And someone even said, we don't even have to pay for it anymore, as long as we just use it. So if you know that license is still there for 3 years, and your procurement and your CFO is going to be like, no, we have this already, right? Again, going back to the opportunity cost. Find a business case why it'll damage your business if you keep on running on this software, even if it looks free, right? Because nothing is for free.
Rick, what does it mean for Plus?
Right. Well, a few things I got back from the discussions in the back of the room was it's very difficult to find the granularity of your market architecture. How many microservices or business functions, as we call them, do you need? So we found a few rules of thumb to actually find this out. And we said, so you need to own and mutate 1 business object. So that could be a price, a promotion, and just 1 thing. And all the processes that can change that 1 function are within that structure. And it also produces 1 data set. So if you have a decision on a promotion that is 1 data set, you can just send it out. And so then you automatically know your decouple moment. You never have to BPM do some orchestration across multiple functions. And you can just make sure that your technical solution also remains small enough to be changeable by those people.
Yeah.
So I think that's the sweet spot for us for the market architecture. And I also think that if you approach it this way, you prevent falling into the trap you already mentioned, that you have like 1,000 small microservices and they're really like ultra microservices, and the orchestration of those becomes a pitfall. There's an extra complexity layer that you didn't account for. So I think
And one of the interesting things that I also heard in the discussion is that sometimes actually it is better to start with a monolith and iterate over the monolithic kind of setup until you really find out what are the kind of the services that you want, what are the APIs, and just at that point in time you basically break up your monolith in the microservices and the respective APIs that you want to have.
Yeah.
And one of the learnings that I have seen in many startups and also went painfully through myself is if you need to re-architect a microservice architecture, then that is a very painful thing, so that you certainly try to avoid this. So hopefully you don't need to make a re-architecting, but how about Otrium?
I hadn't realized how political the transition to a MACH architecture can be, and how important it is to have buy-in of your organization, but also of that you have that organizational structure. And then my entrepreneurial itch always goes off, and I would try to hack an MVP together to prove to your business owners that you can make an impact, and like surprise them with how fast you can do something, even if you have to hack it together and like it's maybe not really connected, and you cheat a little bit on the that you manually connect these systems, but just proving that you can move so much quicker if you go composable. That's what I would do as an entrepreneur.
An interesting question that pops to my mind while we are discussing about, let's say, the transition towards more this microservice architecture. You have Conway's law and reverse Conway's law, which essentially means that one or the other way your organization will follow the architecture that you have in your technical systems, and also the reverse. Maybe Sonja, you have seen so many kind of, so many implementations, so many applications of the MACH transition. Have you seen actually that while we obviously want to prepare for the transition towards the MACH architecture, that also organizations after implementing MACH are transitioning themselves organizationally towards modeling organizationally what you have in the software architecture?
Yes, 100%. What was that Spotify model called? Squads, I think they had. That was really hip for a while. I think Spotify themselves stopped it. But the spirit of that is what I keep on hearing back. So rather than having a business team and a product management team and a development team, that the initiatives guide the teams, and that the goals are on a team basis and shared. So IT has the goal to increase the conversion rate of blah, whatever the initiative is, at the same rate as the marketing side and the product team has. And that actually starts then that miracle, right? Because the friction in the organization gets less. But that only happens if the C-level gets it and stops those ditch fights. Is that the word in English? Anyway, the fighting, the trenches, the trench fighting between the different functions.
So one of my goals is that all of us can take maybe at least one kind of learning out of this kind of discussion. Can I ask all of you to just in a very short, snappy way, 30 seconds, share what is the kind of the main thing what everybody should take out of today?
Do you want me to start? Okay, so MACH, M-A-C-H, alliance.org, right? Sign up to the newsletter, because you had so many fantastic questions to me, but you can ask that other digital leaders who are MACH ambassadors and who've done it, who have the same struggles as you do. There's podcasts. You can call all these people up and ask them for help, and they're there for you. Okay,
Max, what do you want to give us as a call for action?
Start fast, start small, fail fast, succeed fast, and have a lot of fun.
Succeed fast, I liked it. And Jurek, closing, what is your call for action?
Yeah, I would say just to to very briefly touch on the reverse Conway maneuver again. That works if you know where your business is heading. And so before 2010, we just had category managers, and they did everything. And now you've got price managers, condition managers, promotion managers, publication managers, everything managers. Right, so once you know how to separate those people and give them back their own function, then you know also the granularity of your market architecture, and you can slowly, every change request builds in that direction. So then you create a blueprint of the organizational structure to be. And that's where you become of use to the different board members. That's how you stay alive.
So many things in this 30 seconds. Thanks a lot. And then my takeaway or my main message is start tomorrow. Very simple.